Hi, I'm Laurie Havelock. Welcome to the IR Magazine and Corporate Secretary ESG Integration Forum 2019, the first one in Europe. I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Matz, Director and Global Head of Strategy and Innovation for IHS Markit. Brian, pleasure to have you here. I had a few questions for you about the general ESG landscape.
Go right ahead.
So first of all, looking at IR's role in all of this, I wondered if you could just talk us through briefly your views on what kind of role IR should play in ESG communications, and maybe what other departments in the company should take lead as well.
Well, that's going to depend on the company, obviously. There are going to be companies where environmental or social functions are part of the company's bottom line, part of the company's business model. So sometimes you see a company that's in the renewable energy business has that entire function existing within an operational department. What I'd say for IR needs to be, and NERI in the US has done a pretty good job of a policy statement on this, suggesting that IR has to be aware of everything that's going on inside the company, both for two reasons. One of which is materiality. IR has a better view about what is considered material to the investment community than really anyone else inside the company. That's really their job. The second is disclosure. When you start thinking about what's considered public or non-public disclosures, no one other than IR should have that responsibility as the final gatekeeper of what's public or what's non-public. When you get into working with rating agencies, with questionnaires, with other sources, IR has to know what's already public and try to source all the information back to what's public today. That's really, IR does that better than anyone else in the company. So I do believe they should own that where possible.
That's something we've heard a few times today. And you mentioned as well collecting data, being aware of what the market thinks. How can awareness of that market intelligence or market sentiment be used in this process?
So that's each company, of course, is going to be treated differently. There's different material functions for each company that will touch a company in that ESG realm. So when you start to think about gathering information from the investment community, but also from other stakeholders, IR is the filter from which information comes in from the outside, from the shareholder base into the company, and that can be distilled down into what does the shareholder think we should possibly be adding to disclosure, or maybe things that we should be changing in terms of our operations. Those are the kind of things, again, that IR touches on a daily basis and brings in from the investment community. Knowing which investors are going to use that as part of their decision-making process maybe falls into that realm of market intelligence where they'll be able to take that information and also take changes to how the company operates or communicates, push it out to the market, and generate a benefit from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, but time sense. And another theme we've heard about today is ESG-specific events, and roadshows is something that comes up again and again as a vital way of communicating with those constituents. I wondered, in your experience, how common are those roadshows, and maybe what are some best practices for how to undertake them?
Honestly, I'm over from the States where that is not as common.
No.
You do occasionally see some folks involved more in the stewardship discussion, supporting the voting decision, getting out to see some of the larger passive investors or other places. Really dedicated ESG roadshows for the investment decision exist primarily in Europe. I think you guys ran some stats on this as IR Magazine not too long ago. If I remember, the number was for Europe, about 16% of companies, it was somewhere in that range, have already conducted ESG roadshows in the last year. You do see that as fairly common in London, in Paris, etc. I guess as to best practices, you really start with the existing relationship you have with the fundamental analyst or portfolio manager that own the company. They'll a lot of times arrange for the right people to be in the room from an E or S or G perspective, whether it's a stewardship team that's involved on the voting side, or whether it's someone who are working with ESG data or information that comes in. Working closely with those primary fundamental analysts is usually the way to start, but sometimes you want to reach outside of those. Sometimes there's thematic investors that run their own portfolios separate from what the fundamental investor looks at. Sometimes reaching out to them separately, inviting them into the room makes sense too.
Absolutely, valuable tool. Brian, thank you so much for your time, and thanks. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.